welcome to Unitarian Universalist Church West. Today we begin our explorations on the theme of change. This morning we're considering the story of this congregation, how it is told and how it might change. Reverend Julie asked if what's done is truly done and gone. As we gather, let us acknowledge that the history of what we call Wisconsin includes the tragic treatment of the indigenous people who were careful stewards of the land before the first European settlers came. Those of us who are not indigenous benefit from that tragic history. We also acknowledge our need to address racism, which continues to lead to the violent deaths of Black and indigenous people. We know that anti-Black racism and settler colonialism perpetuate inequalities, injustices, poverty, and exclusion in U.S. society. We commit ourselves to becoming an anti-racist faith community dedicated to equity and racial justice. My name is Larry Hawley, and I'm a member of your Board of Trustees. The last time I stood here, I talked about liking social activities, and I stand by that. So anyone who's listening, I invite you to come to Anita and my house for an Oktoberfest next year, and let's have a party celebrating her German heritage. The catch-22 is you got to bid on it. I also spoke about justice, or the lack of justice. And no matter what happens on Tuesday, we will fight for justice, because that's who we are. But as a member of your Board of Trustees, I request that you talk to your Board of Trustees and the transition team so that we determine where our focus is. If you are a visitor, we hope you feel welcome here. If you'd like to connect further with us, there are 3 possible ways. Email visitor@uucw.org, fill out the yellow form in your order of service, or scan the QR code in your order of service. We'd like to get to know you. Today, the middle schoolers are on a field trip to visit First Unitarian Society in Milwaukee. So after the story time, those of you who are in grade 5 or younger are invited to go with our religious leaders to their own programming. Parents and young children have 3 options to watch the service. You could watch in the community room where coffee's served, where there's a TV. You could stay in the sanctuary and know that you are always welcome here. And you could participate at the activity table, which allows some movement as you also listen. As you may have noticed, Ruben Pirainen is missing today. He's ill, and while he tested negative, it is best to stay home so as not to pass germs to others. This is a reminder that while masks are optional, there was someone here last week who later tested positive for COVID. We do encourage you to wear a mask, especially as we spend more time indoors. So today there will be many changes in the music program. We've chosen past recordings, and each one will include information and titles and composers. Anyone online, if our camera cues don't work quite right, this is why. Our apologies, and Ruben, we hope you feel better soon. Another important announcement, because it's coming this Saturday, is we have our biannual auction happening. Tickets are $10, and you will need to register in order to bid. More information about the auction has been sent out by email. The auction site is open for your pre-auction viewing, and beginning at 7 p.m. on Wednesday, bidding opens on most items. There are also many buy it now items. Although it's virtual, we encourage you to gather in small groups to take part. Host a watch party at home, compete with one another for coveted auction items, and tell your friends. You can direct them to our website or share our Facebook page posts with them. The auction is open to everyone, and we want to share the opportunity to bid on all wonderful auction items. After the service today, Dave Cicero, our Director of Lifespan Religious Education, is hosting a conversation about the ongoing work to revise Article 2 of the UUA bylaws. This is where the language of our UU principles is codified, and some possible big changes are being proposed. You'll want to stay to learn more. It's really a privilege to gather together and to attend to things that matter in life. You are all welcome here. In the words of Reverend Ian Rydell, come one, come all. Come with your missing pieces and your extra screws. Come with your hard edges and soft spots. Come with your bowed heads and your upright spines. Come, all you flamboyant and drab, verbose and quiet fidgeting and lethargic, all of you with large vision and tender hearts, all of you with small courage and tender fears. Bring your lisp and your stutter and your song. Bring your gravel and your drawl and your lilt. Bring your anger and your joy and your righteous indignation. Come into this space and be welcome. Bring who you are. Bring where you've traveled. Bring what you long for, and let us worship together. Thank you.
So have any of you ever seen petroglyphs? While the word petroglyphs is not specific to any one origin or place, on this continent it's usually used to describe rock carvings that were created in the pre-Columbian era. Typically they represent aspects of indigenous spirituality. There's a large site near where I lived in Ontario that the First Nations there call the Rocks That Teach. That particular sacred site is sacred because there are deep crevices in the rock in the Canadian Shield that are believed to lead down to the spirit world, and there's an underground trickle of water that runs beneath the rocks, and it produces sounds interpreted as those of the spirits speaking. I visited that site on multiple occasions. Reverend Lisa Day has written about such an experience, maybe at the Jeffers Petroglyphs in Minnesota, because that's near where she serves. And I share her words as an invocation: hallowed ground and hard stone. I remove my shoes because this is hallowed ground, the guide says. A holy place, not an everyday place. The guide tells us how we know, or think we know, it was the one and not the other for those people millennia ago. But aren't the places where we live holy ground? Don't our very acts of feeding one another, healing one another, singing to one another, teaching one another, dancing together, and weeping together hallow the places where we live? This is an early morning image, the guide says, spritzing it with water so we can see it on a cloudy afternoon. Shifting light through the hours and the seasons reveals different images. And isn't that the way it is with the images of our lives? That the signs and the symbols, events and turning points and decisions telling the stories of our days and years come into clarity and fade again through cycles of light and dark, seasons of birth and growth, hibernation and death. This stone is hard, the guide says, harder even than granite, so hard that the snows and rains and winds of thousands of years have not erased marks left by the glaciers of the last ice age. Yet, the buffalo wore one tall rock smooth, rubbing away their irritations against it till it shone like glass. Isn't even this the way of our lives, that flesh and blood can find relief in rough places, that irritants can polish us, that hard will sometimes yield to soft after countless repeated encounters? We gather in this place of deep history, the holy ground on which we live, filled with signs and symbols that tell the story of this church, knowing as we repeatedly encounter these stories that the hard can yield to soft. May it be so.
The flaming chalice is the symbol of Unitarian Universalism. According to Carol Lou Nelson, this congregation's first chalice existed way before our permanent home. The chalice that was used in our Wauwatosa rented quarters was constructed by hand from a butane candle with an applied base. One summer in the late 60s, early 70s, it was loaned to the summer RE program and disappeared. Then, Dennis Briley purchased a pewter one in memory of his mother. It was taken to a weekend retreat by Reverend Jandorf and rattled around in his car trunk for a week. The resulting dents resulted in the purchase of another just like it. The present brown chalice, pottery chalice, was made and gifted to the congregation by Eddie Daniel. So although our chalice has changed, its light has not. We are led by that light, inspired by its flame, and drawn together by its warmth. We invite those of you at home to light your own chalice with us. Today's chalice lighting words are those of Audette Fulbright Folson. I invite you to join me in reading. This light we kindle is set in the lamp of our history. We inherit this free faith from the brave and gentle, fierce and outspoken, hearts and minds that have come before us. Let us be worthy inheritors of this faith, and through our good works pass it boldly to a new generation. We light our chalice that we might be the brave, the gentle, the fierce, and the outspoken, working together to pass along this light to a new generation.
Oops, stop. Oh. We are embodying the march of time today by singing songs from progressive generations, which helps us to get a sense of how the story of UUCW is nested within the story of the evolution of Unitarian Universalism, which is nested within the story of society. The music for the first hymn, Rank by Rank, was probably written in the 1930s, and the words in our hymnal were updated by Carl Seberg at approximately the time this congregation was founded. For years, this song was used as the processional for the big Service of the Living Tradition at the UUA General Assembly, but it has mostly been abandoned for its language of the patriarchy. With great thanks to Ruben for recording this from his sickbed, please rise in body and or spirit to accompany the feeling of those times by singing Rank by Rank, Again We Stand. It's number 358 in the Gray Hymnal.
From the four winds gather. Good morning. I'm Dave Cicero. My pronouns are he and his. And I direct the religious education programs for children, youth, and adults here at UU Church West. So, the theme that we're exploring this month is being on the path to change. And some say, it's kind of ironic, but it always seems to prove true, the only thing that we can count on is change. But just when getting used to the way things are going, bam, something happens, and we have to change course. We have to alter our plans. Unitarian Universalism is not much different than that. Many describe it as a living tradition. That is, what we value and how we put our beliefs into practice, into action, is not set in stone. Now, this can be unsettling for some, but it does assure us that our faith can remain meaningful to us as we and the world continues to evolve and grow and develop. So that said, ideas about changing don't just come out of nowhere. How we act today is based on what we've learned in our past. Oops, a little too far there. So today's story began as a song, In My Life. It was written by John Lennon and Paul McCartney, who became very famous when they were still quite young. And I've read that the words started as a list of places that John had been to. Strawberry Fields, Penny Lane, the train station, just a list. And it's probably a good idea that he had bandmates to help him change the lyrics a bit. And they eventually were used just a year or two ago to become the text of this book published by Little Simon, which is an imprint of Simon & Schuster, Children's Publishing Division. And it's illustrated by Genevieve Santos of San Jose, California, which happens to be where I started my teaching career. In my life. There are places I'll remember all my life, though some have changed. Some forever, not for better. Some have gone and some remain. All these places had their moments. With lovers and friends, I still can recall. Some are dead and some are living. In my life, I've loved them all. So far, this seems to be about remembering the past. The illustrator here has shown us a girl, probably her mother, having a wonderful time together with her new bike. And I'm wondering, what lessons has that girl learned from these experiences? But of all these friends and lovers, there is no one compares to you. And these memories lose their meaning when I think of love as something new. Though I know I'll never lose affection for people and things that went before. I know I'll often stop and think about them. In my life, I'll love you more. So our character here seems to have made a decision based on her experiences and feelings from her own past about how she'll act as she continues to grow. What decisions like that have you made for yourself? How do you make the time in your busy life to reflect and remember and decide how will you change? Though I know I'll never lose affection for people and things that went before, I know I'll often stop and think about them. In my life, I'll love you more. In my life, I'll love you more. So here, the girl has obviously made it clear that she's going to continue to cherish her memories of the places, especially the people that she has loved in the past. And those memories won't hold her back from recognizing that her life has changed. And so must her focus. She pledges to remember without any regrets, but also to devote herself even more to those around her today and into the future. So, of course, I was sorry to hear Ruben wouldn't be here to accompany me today. I wasn't actually going to sing it. I was just going to read it with the music in the background, but, thanks. I hope he's on the mend and able to join us again next time. But at this point, I'm going to invite Jack to come up and light our RE lantern. Our middle school students are visiting First Unitarian Society in Milwaukee today, seeing firsthand how the ways Unitarian Universalism is practiced can change, not only with time, but with location and community. And so now I invite you to join me in singing as the children here leave for their RE classes today. As you go, may joy surround you. As you go, go in peace. Know our love is with you always. As you go, as you go, as you go, may joy surround you. As you go, go in peace. Know our love is with you always. As you go, as you go.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jeannie Baker. I'm a member of your Board of Trustees and also of the Stewardship Committee. I want to echo Larry. I'm super excited about what's going to happen Saturday night. I'm already warming up my credit card, familiar with the numbers, stretching it out, because I'm expecting it to combust on Saturday. Join me. And Larry didn't mention this, but I'm going to use his gestures too. The Board of Trustees has got a super fun tailgate party as an auction item, and Stewardship has got a cocktail party featuring Ruben and featuring all kinds of cocktaily stuff. It's going to be super fun. Leslie and I have some hors d'oeuvres that would be great at a party for you, and me personally, I will teach you to knit along with some great UUCW knitters. I'm looking at Carol, Eva McCrossan, Carol Lou, and others of you who I don't know are great knitters, but please tell me. All kinds of fun things. You've already heard that today's service is all about history, the story of this congregation and how we might tell it to the future. Here's a reading by the Reverend Sean Neil Barron called a history of church, including yours. One day, your church was born. Maybe it was a gathering of saints called together for the common worship of a wrathful God, ceaselessly praying. Or maybe a few brave souls answered a notice in a newspaper, curiosity piqued by the announcement of a religion where free thinking and tolerance were bedrocks. No matter how it happened, your church was born. A gathering of people, humble, caring, anxious, and quirky, all at the same time, who covenanted to be with one another on the journey of life, death, and everything in between. And so it began, a faithful few, beautifully imperfect, called to that central task, that human task, of connecting, loving, and serving. It was just an infant, and yet it was thrust deep into the human condition, tasked to hold minds and souls, bodies and hearts, along with the roller derby of disease and birth, infighting and joy, and Christmas pageants. Sometimes all of those things at the same time. They gathered to hear the world broken open for insightful sermons, rejuvenating music, and a community whose fierce devotion to each other's well-being rivaled a bear for its cubs. But it always wasn't like that, of course. There were the trying times. And I don't mean the netherworld of committee meetings. No, I mean the really trying times, when the church almost split in half over the war or integration, or when the mill left the town vacant, or when the minister crossed that line and people couldn't speak about it for decades. But somehow you were still there, still on the town commons, still the church that everyone recognizes, still the ones that show up every time you were called on, still using the communion silver until you voted to sell it. New people came and they changed things, small things, big things, things that nobody noticed until it happened, until suddenly it was hard to even recognize anything anymore. That was a hard moment, a tearful moment. And other things changed too. The proclamations about God, once heard loud from the pulpit, softened. Wrathful became loving. Distant became intimate. Mandatory became optional. After the war, the nursery and RE classrooms were overflowing. Each baby dedicated reminded the church of the incredible beauty of life and the gift this community, all huddled around the baby, would bestow upon this child. The history of your church is more a story of the determination of love to break forth than it is about tie-dye or chalices or sermon discussions or social justice committees. The history of the church is the history of human enterprise, evolving in its sights and sounds, yet revolving always around its core. The history of your church is the gift of potential and momentum, of baggage and personality. The history of your church is the launch pad from which you spring into action or disarray. Each day, your church is born. Thank you.
Every day a new story is born, a new draft of the old story. It's true of this congregation, and it's also true for each of us. Many of you know Carolyn McDade's song, Spirit of Life. A story in the UU World magazine told the story of its genesis. Apparently, late one night in the early 1980s, McDade was driving a close friend home from an exhausting meeting about Central American solidarity. What McDade remembers most clearly was the feeling she had. Oops. I missed a slide somewhere, sorry. Well, so in our slide shuffle, something got lost. I'm just gonna go on to see if it came next. Nope, okay. We're just not doing it right now. Okay, leave it there. It was a picture of Carolyn McDade singing her heart out. What she remembers most clearly was the feeling she had. She said, when I got to my friend's house, I told her, I feel like a piece of dried cardboard that has lain in the attic for years. Just open wide the door and I'll be dust. I was tired, not with my community, but with the world. My friend just sat with me, and I loved her for sitting with me. McDade then drove to her own home, walked through the house in the dark, found her piano, and this was her prayer: "May I not drop out." It wasn't something she wrote down, but something she prayed. She knew more than anything that she wanted to continue in faith with the movement. She wanted to both continue and change the story. I'd like to invite you into a time of meditation during which I'll offer some questions and prompts to guide you. So prepare yourself for that in whatever way works for you. Get comfortable. Take notice of how and where you are. Ground yourself by becoming aware of the earth below you. Quiet your mind by focusing on your breath. Slow down your energy. Close your eyes or soften your gaze if that helps, and just breathe. Take some time to scan your body. Everything that you're made of and everything that you've experienced is held right here in your body. Wander through your interior spaces, perhaps noting the memories that come up. That spot feels tight because, oh, here's that pain and there's that place that loves to be touched or tickled. Your body has a story to tell, so just see if you can connect with some of that story. And now let your body lead you into the story that you tell about yourself. Are you strong, awkward, athletic, too old? Are you sensitive, intuitive, inquisitive? Do you come from a family with many branches, or is your family line straight and singular? Do you have your father's hands? The same eyes as your sister? What is it you love doing? What's challenging for you? Where did you learn to cook or drive or sing? See if you can identify how you've become. And now, how would you describe yourself to someone who's never met you, that they might understand the essence of who you are? Do you like this story you tell? Does it serve you? How might you tell your story using the lens of who you would like to be or be known or become? How might you live in a way that brings this second story into being? We're going to ponder that question for 2 full minutes. Then I'll ring the bell, and Reuben will lead us into singing Spirit of Life 2 times through. This is a song that became a favorite of many UUs in the 1980s, so 40 years ago. It is found at 123 in the hymnal, though I expect many of you can sing it by heart. But first, some time of silence and reflection. can remain seated while we sing. Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea. Move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me. Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea. Giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me. Spirit of life, come unto me. For sometimes in my world, inspiration for a sermon, come to me. In truth, over the years, I've come to trust that sermon muse. They're not always very clear or explicit, and sometimes for my liking, that muse is too late in arriving, but they do show up. The sermon muse always shows up. Now this week they showed up plenty early. On Tuesday night, I attended a great show at the Milwaukee Rep called Wife of a Salesman. Its last shows are today at 2 and 7, so you might want to rush out to see it. It's a reinvention of Arthur Miller's classic Death of a Salesman, a play which focuses on Willie Loman and his dissatisfaction with the way his life and his dreams have played out in a society that is equally unsatisfying for him. And while there are two female fixtures in his life, his wife and his mistress, their characters in the play have very little prominence. Miller is known for his focus on the male protagonist, and again in this case, the women's stories aren't told. But in Wife of a Salesman, playwright Eleanor Burgess brings those two women together in what has been a missing narrative, a deep discussion between the wife and the mistress about their own roles and dreams and lived restrictions within society. And she shows that what was true in the 1950s is still true today. At its core, Burgess's writing highlights the question, whose feelings and needs are worthy of attention and care? What is it that gets left out in the stories we tell? Now, in the show notes, Burgess shares that her grandfather was a traveling salesman like Willie Loman, and that her grandmother lived a life very similar to that portrayed in Death of a Salesman. And then during the pandemic, Burgess found herself confined to a life taking care of kids at home while her husband worked, and she realized that she was living basically the same life as her grandmother. And living the same story, this cracked her open and led her to wonder about the impact of canonical narratives, canonical narratives, stories that get told over and over and over, and how we keep repeating them, especially when they remain implicit, untold. The stories we inherit from our past, she says, shape our present. What's done is done, but not done, not ever. I love that I accidentally attended this play in the same week that I had planned to speak about the story that is UUCW's past, as I, like Burgess, wondered about how that story impacts what and how things happen here today. A big task on an interim minister's to-do list is to listen to stories. I've spent time with the transition team and the board and the staff, past members, past staff, and many of you as individuals listening to your stories. Still, I'm a long way from understanding which of those stories have taken a fixed place as part of the canon that is UUCW. So even though I can't say exactly what this congregation's story is, I want to invite you into wondering about the impact of story with me. I'm going to use some examples, some case studies from a few things that I've heard tell about Unitarian Universalist Church West. Like this. UUCW provides a place for liberal religion in a conservative area. That seems to be the creation story of this congregation. UUCW began as a branch of the First Unitarian Society of Milwaukee, a kind of mission project to foster the growth of liberal religion in the western suburbs. In fact, Reverend John Cyrus, First Church's minister at the time, has been called the father of this congregation. And an important footnote to that story is that there was resistance from both Elm Grove and Brookfield to such a liberal church putting down roots here. Does this story still live in UUCW's DNA? If so, in what ways? And how does UUCW live into that legacy? Is it a story of resistance, of making waves, of being countercultural, of converting the conservatives? How does that story affect cooperation and connections within this community? Here's another. UUCW was once crowded to overflowing, especially in the RE program. In the early days, while still renting, children were actually driven to members' homes for classes for lack of enough space for them. And when you moved into this building, there were over 150 kids registered in the program. Even as recently as some 20 years ago, there were so many children in the program that some classes met in hallways, hundreds of children and nearly as many volunteers. I wonder what the impact of such a heyday, now past, has on this community. Does it cast a vision for what UUCW was supposed to be? Is it a source of pride? A reminder of what's been lost? Bad feelings for not living up to it? When those times are mentioned, what feelings show up? How about this one? During the first 6 years of existence, the people of UUCW bought land, incorporated and joined the UUA, called a minister, purchased a home for that minister, had capital campaigns, and constructed the original building on this property. In 6 years. Carol Lou Nelson describes this time and the process of moving in here as hopeful, proud, and victorious. How does this spirit live on in UUCW? Is it the story now is the story that's told now one of broken dreams? Or does it inspire you to continually live up to that spirit of accomplishment? Very few of the movers and shakers of that time are alive or present, but are there still expectations of moving fast and getting a lot done? And how does pride in this building continue to live on in both helpful and unhelpful ways? And here's another, a harder one. Several ministers, including one music director, have not had good boundaries when it comes to relationships and the use of power within this congregation. While specifics of those individual stories are perhaps best lost to history, it's important to note that there has been a rather surprising amount of misconduct in professional leadership in this congregation. And while it's been common practice to have the minister's office in the manse, I even wondered when reading about the early days of UUCW if choosing to put the church office in the home of the first minister contributed to this. The minister's home and private life became the property of the congregation, and perhaps vice versa. Today's leadership have wondered together about this pattern. And my best attempt at understanding this so far is that, like the impacts of intergenerational trauma, UUCW may have come to be comfortable with ministers who aren't so good at maintaining professional boundaries and standards. Somehow, ministers have been given space to misconduct. And knowing this story makes me especially attentive to my own behavior, because I don't want to contribute in any way to retelling that story. So what can we learn from that story now? I can't help but assume that it contributes to feelings of distrust and the perception of a lack of transparency. To change that story, I believe that UUCW needs to develop a culture of strong covenantal relationships and understandings. And this is going to be the topic for a congregational conversation on covenant coming up after the service on November 20th. Covenants that are known and practiced can provide the structure and the support for right relationships, including learning to be able to name and call out inappropriate behavior. Now, these few stories are just examples, and I tell them through my personal lens that has only had its eye on this congregation for a few short months, which means they're certainly not the whole story, if even completely accurate. But still, the question remains, what stories from the past do you want to perpetuate, and which do you want to change? How can those stories take you forward? Stories are the holy ground on which we create our lives. Sort of like the rock carvings that are known as petroglyphs, we trace and retrace familiar patterns, creating grooves and demarcations, often without even noticing it. And we return to those stories to give us meaning and to help us craft our lives, whether or not they're helpful. You know, about 30 years ago, I was going through some career counseling. Like everyone does, I had kind of carved out a story that involved a lot of expectations and responsibilities related to work and family and house and connections, and I felt trapped in it. That counselor is actually the person who introduced me to Unitarian Universalism and helped me to change my story from one in which I was trapped by circumstances to a story with the possibility of change. And this eventually led me on adventures that involved leaving home, going to seminary, and exploring new possibilities. That counseling process was very much like narrative therapy, which I imagine many of you are familiar with. It's a therapeutic process that encourages telling one's story in order to see it plainly, in order to see those places where we rub up against the stone of our lives, whether that's to scratch an itch or to rub a memory smooth. In that telling, one is able to sit in a holy place with all that's past and all that's present and just hold it and learn from it, perhaps even to love it. The narrative therapy process then moves on to a suggested retelling of the story of one's life, this time with newly formed or even as yet unimagined endings. How could it be different? What could one do to change the patterns that keep repeating? Honoring the past, how can we lift up and carry with us those things that we love and that give us purpose while leaving what's not so helpful behind? For me, that kind of work was transformational. It's what allowed me to change my life and become a minister. It gave me the space to take a clear-eyed look at my life, to free myself from artificial bonds, to cast a vision for who I wanted to be. My friend Kate, who's actually here today, was present the first time I very tentatively presented this vision to a small group of friends. In that early vision casting, I dreamed of being something that I quite vaguely described as sage, artist, minister, which was not a job description easily found in the want ads. Then, if someone had told me that it would lead to this, to serving a congregation as a minister, I probably would have jumped ship. This was a plot twist that was anathema to my understanding of my life story. But isn't that the beauty of stories? One never knows what's going to happen next. All this to say that for me, the process involved an honest look at my life, allowing myself to dream of what could be different, and then taking small steps in that direction, allowing that dream to blossom and to evolve and to grow. I can't pretend it was easy or that it didn't involve the pain of loss. There were many. But it did help me to realize that I'm the architect of my own life and to embrace that work. And this is the work of the interim period, that you take a hard look at who you are, how you got here, to choose what you want to carry and what you want to cast off, and then to create a new vision into the future. Because that vision is what will inform your search for your next settled minister, as you're going to be looking for someone who's well equipped to accompany you on that chosen journey. Howard Zinn said this: "What we choose to emphasize in our complex history will determine our lives. If we only see the worst, it destroys our capacity to do something. If we remember those times and places, and there are so many, where people have behaved magnificently, this gives us the energy to act, and at least the possibility of sending this spinning top of a world in a different direction. And if we do act, in however small a way, we don't have to wait for some grand utopian future, because the future is a succession of presents. And to live now as we think human beings should live, in defiance of all that's bad around us, is itself a marvelous victory," unquote. As we enter this week, when elections will determine the future, at least for the short term, keep these words in mind. When we remember times and places in the history of this country, in this congregation, and in the history of our families, and the history of our own lives, learning from what has been, and then choosing which stories to tell and which to carry forward is what will determine the future. Even when the world around us breaks our hearts, and even when the way is unclear. Remember justice, remember community, remember love, remember what matters. May it be so. Blessed be, and amen.
Build me a world where there's home for children to grow with no poverty, no hatred or war. Build me a world where there's room to move in, with wide open scenery and clear skies above. I'll climb the mountains and look out over the sea. I'll build the bridges connecting people to me. Build me a world where there's no more sickness. We'll share all our promises, the rich and the poor. I'll build this world if you'll stand stand beside me, give me hope, give me faith, give me love. I'll climb the mountains and look out over the sea. I'll build the bridges connecting people to me. Build me a world where there's no more sickness. We share all our promises, the rich and the poor. I'll build this world if you'll stand beside me. Give me hope, give me faith, give me love.
Good morning again. I'll say good morning again to all of you again. I'd like to introduce Karen Sammy. She is Director of Development for Maida House. She served in various fundraising roles for Maida House since 2006, and she has been in the position as Director of Maida House for over 10 years. She began her career at Maida House as the coordinator of volunteer services and in-kind gifts. Prior to that, she worked in fundraising for the Girl Scouts of Milwaukee. Karen and her husband live in Mequon, where they are raising 2 children. Welcome to UUCW.
Thank you. This is my timer. I won't go long. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for choosing Maida House for Split the Plate this month. Maida House has been around since 1963, and our mission is to end the generational cycle of addiction by healing women and strengthening families. At Maida House, much like here, our belief set is to be trauma-informed, to be compassionate. The women we are serving have pretty rough histories of trauma and abuse. Every year, roughly 75 to 80% of the clients who we serve are survivors of some sort of trauma or abuse, often stemming from childhood. So at Maida House, we don't wag our fingers and shame people, but instead we welcome them. We ask them to tell us what happened to them. And then we help them address their therapeutic needs, which is really individual to each woman. So our treatment program is not a one-size-fits-all. It's not a 30 or a 60-day program, but they're really developed specifically for each of the clients who comes through our doors. So I won't stand here and talk for the next hour like I really could about Maida House. I've been there 16 years, and I think it's a terrific, terrific program. But I will be around after the program, so if anybody has any questions, I invite you to come up and talk to me more. We also have a pretty great website full of stories. So speaking of stories, there are a number of clients who have elected to tell their stories in support of our agency, and we're very grateful to them, and I think you'll find them very interesting. So thank you so much again on behalf of the women and the children at Maida House.
If you are at our service or at our service virtually, you can please go to UUCW's website, seen before you here. Go to the Donate tab, select Split the Plate, or you can obviously text or mail your gift to UUCW. Thank you for your gifts to Maida House. We will now receive the morning offering.
switch on this. Is there one? Vicki, Evan, is this all? Okay, there. You're there. Okay, good. A few weeks ago, we heard and learned the Mamuse song, We Shall Be Known. We'll sing it again today as a representation of a new song within our movement, one that's very much loved today, and also as a song that calls us toward being the people that we wish to be, the story we want to tell, perhaps the new story. Several choir members have volunteered to help me lead you. The words are printed on the order of service, and we'll sing it through 3 times. I know you'll catch on, so please stand. We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle round to tend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now, and what a time to be alive. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle round to tend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now, and what a time to be alive. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle round to tend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now, and what a time to be alive. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. Please remain standing for our closing words, and thank you for singing with me. Take a look around. Offer gratitude for whatever insight, inspiration, comfort, connection you might have found here today. Connect with the story that is the beauty of this congregation, past, present, and future. Our closing words are those of Steve J. Crump, that which is worthy of doing. That which is worthy of doing, create with your hands. That which is worthy of repeating, speak with your voice. That which is worthy of remembering, hold in your hearts. And that which is worthy of living, go and live it now. taking this flame and all of this morning's experience with us and holding all that we've been in our hearts. Let us go out into the world to do what is worthy of living and to be known as the ones who lead with love. Amen.